Hello students, welcome to La Excellence IAS Kalam program GS Mains Answer Writing Series. This is the season 2 of this series. I am Kiranmai. I am taking forward this series and this season will last 50 episodes. Today is the 4th episode of this season and we are going to discuss a question from GS paper 2 from the polity section and from the topic of anti-defection law and speaker. Let us see what the question is. What is the role of Speaker of the lower houses in Indian parliamentary system in implementing the anti-defection law in spirit? Suggest measures for the same. This question is for 10 marks and we have to write the answer in 150 words. So he is asking about the role of the Speaker in the lower houses in our Indian parliamentary system in implementing the anti-defection law. Let us first see the context in which this question is being asked. There have been many Supreme Court verdicts in the recent times which speak about the role of Speaker in deciding the anti-defection law cases. In November 2019, Supreme Court upheld the disqualification of MLAs who have approached the Supreme Court following their disqualification by the Speaker in Karnataka. And last month, Supreme Court has observed that Parliament should consider creating a new mechanism to replace Speaker as adjudicating authority under the 10th schedule of the Constitution. So this is the second context in which this question is being asked. And very recently, a Manipur minister who had earlier defected from Congress to BJP, he was stripped from his office by the Supreme Court bench. Okay, it was not by the Speaker, it was by the Supreme Court bench in an interim order. It was because the Speaker failed to respond within the time frame which was given to him. Okay. In this case, the court has taken the matter into its hands to disqualify the legislator from taking up ministerial post. So these are some of the cases in which the role of the Speaker in deciding anti-defection law has been in news. So one should always know the context in which the question is being asked so that the answer will be more appropriate to the context. Let us now look at some of the prerequisites required to answer this question. First and foremost, we need to know why this anti-defection law has been enacted and by what process. We also need to know the role of Speaker as mentioned in the 10th schedule. Okay, 10th schedule is about anti-defection law and one needs to know about the schedule which has provisions for anti-defection law and what is the role of the Speaker mentioned in that schedule. So here we are supposed to know the constitutional provisions about the role of the Speaker and we also need to know what is the jurisdiction which Speaker can exercise in pursuance of these provisions. Okay, and one also needs to know the recent issues with respect to anti-defection law, especially with reference to the role of the Speaker. Okay, then one also needs to be aware of recent judgments. I have spoken about a few Supreme Court judgments in the recent past. Okay, apart from the judgments, one also needs to know some of the committees which have been formed specifically for this purpose, or some of the committees which have been formed for electoral reforms have given some guidelines on how to make the Speaker's office impartial or how to make anti-defection law more effective. So all these reports and judgments one needs to be aware of before approaching this answer. Okay. I am now going to discuss what are the points that are to be avoided while writing this answer. See, there is always a tendency to write whatever we know about the issue. For example, given a question on anti-defection law, we tend to write whatever we know about anti-defection law. That is, going beyond Speaker's role, we can write what are the problems associated with anti-defection law. So there is a tendency that people write things which are not mentioned in the question also, but that is not going to fetch you even if it is a genuine point which is of concern. If it is not asked for in the question or if it is not relevant to the question, kindly don't attempt it. Okay. For example, while writing about anti-defection law, one may write that it promotes mass defection by way of mergers. One may also say that it discriminates between nominated legislators and independent legislators. And one may also get tempted to write about the provisions which cause about disqualifications. Okay, so all these things may be important for another question, but for this question we have to stick to the topic of the question, or to the demand of the question, and we have to answer in a more relevant manner. Okay, let us see how to approach this question. We will write the answer in 3 parts: introduction, body, and conclusion. Introduction can be written in 2 or 3 formats. Let us discuss how to write it. In first format, we can write about what is anti-defection law. Okay, you can just define what anti-defection law is or why it has been formed. Otherwise, we can just write the provisions in short, the history of anti-defection law, or the aim of anti-defection law in short. Okay, introduction has to be short so that the body part occupies majority of the space. Okay, and then otherwise we can also write the context of the question in introduction. For example, we have discussed about Supreme Court judgments. I told you about the Supreme Court's call to the Parliament to consider an alternative mechanism to adjudicate upon anti-defection law cases and removing this power from the Speaker's office. Okay, so this can also be mentioned in the introduction. Coming to the body part. So the body will be answered in 2 parts. Why so? Because the question is also asked in 2 parts. The first part is asking about the role of Speaker of lower houses in implementing the anti-defection law in spirit. The second part is asking for measures for the same. So answering the first part, we have to mention about the role of Speaker, what are the constitutional provisions, and what are non-constitutional provisions. That is the jurisdiction of the Speaker with respect to anti-defection law. What his powers are, whether judicial review is applicable to what is adjudicated by the Speaker or not, whether there have been any judgments in the past, we can write about that. So all these things will go in the first part, that is the constitutional provisions and what is the jurisdiction of the Speaker and so on. Okay, coming to the second part of the question, measures to improve the Speaker's role. See, this we will be able to answer only if we know that the Speaker's role in deciding about anti-defection law is declining, and he is being partial, or he is not maintaining neutrality while exercising his powers under anti-defection law. So you will have to mention somewhere about the declining role of Speaker in implementing anti-defection law, and then you can suggest the measures for the same. Okay, so what will be the measures? For example, giving them a time frame to address the questions of disqualification, or strengthening the institution of Speaker, trying to make the Speaker's office more impartial. So all these can be measures that we can write in the second part of the body. Let us now see how to approach the conclusion. See, conclusion can be written in 2 forms. First format, we can write about the importance of anti-defection law, the importance of institution of Speaker for implementing anti-defection law. Okay, and how it has to be strengthened. This can be mentioned in the conclusion. Otherwise, we can quote any of the committee's recommendations which call for strengthening the institution of Speaker, or those recommendations which call for an alternative mechanism to implement the anti-defection law. Okay, so conclusion can be written in 2 forms. One is mentioning about the importance of anti-defection law, or giving any quoting any committee's recommendations for strengthening anti-defection law implementation. Let us examine one of the answers written, one of the sample answers written by a student. This student has written, 52nd Constitutional Amendment Act of 1985 brought in anti-defection law and added 10th schedule to the Indian Constitution. It was brought in with a view to avoid floor crossing of legislators for monetary benefits or in favor of lucrative posts. So here, he is trying to show his knowledge. He has knowledge about when anti-defection law was enacted and what was added to the Constitution because of this Constitutional Amendment Act, and then why this law was passed in the first place. So he is mentioning the history as well as the reason why this law was enacted. Then he writes, role of Speaker of lower houses. Okay, so he is trying to address the first part of the question. He has given a heading to it. So in that first point, He or she is the deciding authority regarding disqualifications with respect to defections. Until 1992, this power did not come under judicial review. But in 1992, in Quixote-Holohan case, Supreme Court's verdict said that Speaker's office or presiding officer functions as a tribunal and the decisions taken by them can come under judicial review. Okay, so here he is mentioning that Speaker is a deciding authority with respect to defection. He has also mentioned about a case, Supreme Court case, wherein it said that Speaker's office comes under judicial review. So he has made an important point about the role of the Speaker. That is a good point. Okay, and in the second point, he writes, he or she is empowered to make rules to give effect to provisions of 10th schedule. Here he is mentioning about one more role of the Speaker, that is, Speaker makes rules in the House so as to give effect to provisions of 10th schedule. Okay, so that is the second role of the Speaker he is speaking about. Let us see what he further writes. The office of Speaker has come under criticism for deliberately postponing disqualification decisions because of his or her loyalty to the party from which he is elected. That is, criticized for non-neutrality. Okay, so here he is trying to mention why the Speaker's role has come under criticism with respect to anti-defection law. So this can be taken as a linking statement to the second part of the question. Okay, so next he goes on writing measures for improving role of Speaker in implementing anti-defection law. So this is, here he is trying to address the second part of the question. Let us see what he writes. The office should be made impartial by permanently debarring Speaker from taking up any post in any political party after his term, or by promising him a permanent Speaker post. Okay, so here he is trying to suggest measures to make the Speaker's post impartial and neutral. Okay, so he is trying to mention measures which have been existent in other constitutions, like by offering him a permanent Speaker post or preventing him from taking up any post in any political party after his term. Okay, so how to make the Speaker's office impartial, he is speaking here. And next statement, he writes, time frame has to be given to decide disqualification on grounds of defection. This we also have discussed. And third, he mentions a Supreme Court's judgment. Let us see, as Supreme Court observed, Parliament should consider alternative mechanism to decide disqualifications on grounds of defection. Okay, here he is not mentioning about the improving the role of Speaker, but he is talking about an alternative mechanism altogether, so that Speaker's role will be decreased with respect to defection. Okay, though that is a valid point with respect to anti-defection law as a whole, for improving role of Speaker, that may not be such a good point. However, because the Supreme Court has observed that Speaker's role has to be decimated, we can consider this point. Let us see how he concludes the question. The good intent of anti-defection law can be fulfilled only if the institutional mechanism for implementing the law is robust. So here he is telling that anti-defection law has been passed in good intent, and it can be fulfilled only by strengthening the institutional mechanism for implementing the law. So he is giving an optimistic conclusion. He should have suggested some other measures also in the conclusion so as to make it more holistic. So let us evaluate the answer as a whole. He has written an introduction about 6 lines in length. It is decent introduction. He has mentioned about what anti-defection law is and why it was enacted, and then he mentioned about the role of the Speaker of the House, of the lower houses. That is, he answered the first part in 2 points, but he has given very valid points. Okay, then he used a connecting statement to connect the first part and second part, and then he mentioned in the second part he has given 3 points which are quite valid points, except for the third part which could be considered valid. Okay, so this is a decent answer. The conclusion is also on an optimistic note. This is a decent answer, though we feel that in the core answer the number of points are less. He has talked relevant to the question that is asked, that is to the demand of the question. Okay, so it is a decent answer. We have now come to the end of our discussion. We have discussed about how to approach this question. What are the prerequisites to answer this question? What are the things that are to be avoided while writing this answer? And then we have discussed how to approach the answer from introduction, body and conclusion perspectives. And also we have discussed a sample answer. Let us meet again tomorrow. Thank you.